Should be the episode title.
That should be the episode title. Hello and welcome to the Benzo Rehab Dungeon Religious Deconstruction 14, I think we decided it was.
Yeah.
I am your host, Michael Deebs. Joining me, as they usually do on the Religious Deconstruction videos, is Jacob, friend of the dungeon,
Yep.
former lover of the dungeon, you know, etc. And you wanted to talk today about something that's very important to you, which is your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, I believe. Is that correct?
Oh, do I ever? You know, with Easter being last week, you know, he is risen. He is risen, and you must accept him and bathe in the cleansing blood of the Lord.
But if you bathe too often, that's weird, right?
It's not weird. The frequency is not the issue. It's the pathological.
I'm not clean until I bathe, and I get weird amounts of shit for the fact that I like to take a shower every day.
Yeah, but okay. It's astounding to me that you don't see what the fucking sticking point is here. Most people, I think, in the United States probably bathe every day, but they don't have to fucking say, oh, I need to take a shower every day. You know what I mean? It's the utterance, the need to verbalize. Yeah, that's
we are dragging people into a very personal debate that I think we don't need to really get into.
They should chime in though.
They should know that I'm a guy that bathes is most important.
This is equally as important as the ketchup debate, which I don't know that we've talked about on air. I'm just delaying the serious construction of
yeah, whatever.
What it's like to be returned to pure white after bathing.
You wanted to talk about how Timothy McVeigh did nothing wrong. Is that basically what our premise was?
No, those were your words. I don't want to. No, and it doesn't have to be about McVeigh specifically, but I'm reading that. I burned through like 300 pages of that book yesterday. It's fascinating. But it is truly what I actually did want to talk about was just, alienation and disenfranchisement, specifically among young men. Because, obviously, statistically, those are the people who are going out and doing this kind of thing, like blowing up the kiddies or shooting the kiddies or what have you.
It's always something with kids.
What's that?
I said it's always something with kids.
Always something with kids. You know what? Like, as an expert on not doing illegal shit, I guess my advice would be stay the fuck away from kids.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like legally obligated to stay away from children, but
if they're even if I wasn't. Your kids, stay the fuck away from them. Yeah. Go buy yourself a fucking pack of smokes. Don't come back.
That sounds familiar. Where did I first hear that one from?
I wasn't reading McVeigh's biography. I was reading your biography. Yeah. So, and I mean, part of what's interesting, part of what I think we were going to talk about too was, his tenure in the armed forces during Desert Shield and Desert Storm.
Two of the most justified conflicts that have ever happened.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, obviously part of what fueled his disdain for the American government. And it's actually, the book is interesting because, I mean, I obviously knew the broad contours of the Iran-Iraq war, OPEC, and sort of again, the broad strokes of, okay, we invaded Iraq after they invaded Kuwait. But I mean, one thing it definitely does highlight, and I think is an important kind of, especially right now, historical trope to be familiar with, is the degree to which the United States relies on and props up strong men and then turns on them. I mean, we did this to Saddam. We gave Saddam weapons as late as 1992. So we did it with Saddam. We did it with Gaddafi in Libya. I mean, then to a more kind of lower intensity extent, we did it with Operation Gladio during kind of the Cold War, where we were, arming and funding, ex-Nazi military and officers through. A lot of the money was funneled through the Vatican Bank.
I know we kind of want to stay away from current events, but when you say funding ex-Nazis, I wonder if there's anything happening contemporaneously that
right. Well, and that's the point too, is I mean, Zelensky is a latter-day Saddam or Gaddafi, not in terms of policy. I'm not saying that. I wish he was a Gaddafi. I wish he was a fucking Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a fucking,
he was kind of based.
He was a legend, but he was based. Fucking great fashion sense. Saddam was a bastard. I don't feel bad saying that. I mean, I think Pan-Arabism is interesting, and
the point I always make about situations like this is, yeah, Saddam sucked. Gaddafi was probably not the coolest guy ever, but a little bit more based. But both of them were running functional countries, and then the U.S. got involved, and now you have open air slavery markets in Libya, and Iraq is a fucking nightmare. So, we didn't make anything better by taking out these bastards, and you could argue that, like, if you look at the mathematics of what these countries have done versus what the United States have done, Obama is a worse person than Saddam was.
Yeah, he's a war criminal.
Yeah.
Was a war criminal, Bush is a war criminal. Trump, war criminal. Biden, war criminal. But anyways, point being, so, the book about McVeigh goes into the kind of the military undertaking of Desert Shield and Desert Storm. In McVeigh's experience there, he was part of an experimental program where they it was called Cohort, and the goal was to keep enlistees together in a squad from enlistment up to deployment, because they were trying to experiment with ways to maintain esprit de corps and camaraderie and battlefield efficiency, etc. But he wound up assigned to a Bradley tank and was the gunner on that. And it's interesting that there's conflicting reports about his the degree of his zeal for killing enemy combatants. Some people say he felt awful about it. Some people say, no, he was a fucking mean bastard and he loved blowing people up. Obviously, later, I think we get a little.
He turns out to maybe be a fan of blowing people up.
Yeah, maybe. But and it's interesting too, and that's kind of a sticking point throughout the book, are the contradictions, in part due to just contradictions in sources, but then also in McVeigh himself, he in the years of his incarceration, did give biographical interviews. There was a biography, an authorized biography written of him, and several unauthorized. And then there's, a mountain of defense materials that the author relies on as well. But I mean, McVeigh was just such the archetype of the disaffected middle class male. He was from a broken home. His mother was an alcoholic and abandoned the family. His father was both of his parents worked, but his father was, the breadwinner, and but was not affectionate, did not, provide any sort of emotional support. And McVeigh was he was obsessed with guns because of his relationship with his grandfather. And one thing that's interesting too, I didn't know this. McVeigh is from Buffalo, New York. Yeah. I mean, in my mind, it makes sense. Terry Nichols, Michigan's full of fucking wackos. Oklahoma, Utah, all that, like the Western kind of flyover states full of fucking wackos. But McVeigh, very bright, disaffected, loved guns, was obsessed with guns. And what's interesting too is that he was from a young age obsessed with the Turner Diaries, which is a white supremacist novel about
I think when you say it's a white supremacist novel, you're kind of underselling it. It's full on neo-Nazi
no, I think that's fair.
At that point.
Yeah, it's about race war and government authoritarianism, the Zionist occupied government, quote unquote. And so again, another contradiction around that specifically is the degree to which McVeigh was a lifelong racist, or whether it was something that emerged. And something that the book definitely posits is that it was intensified by the war, and seeing, well, for one, he wasn't anti-Arab. He was very much just anti-Black. Like he hated African Americans, he hated Jews, and the reasons behind his hatred for African Americans were, sort of the typical tropes that racist whites use. They're loud, they're promiscuous,
they don't smell good,
they just the usual bullshit,
welfare queen sort of shit, right?
Right. And he made the point of specifying in an interview that he was a white separatist, not a white supremacist, which is, I would say, it is a distinction. It's not a distinction without a difference. But it's a distinction without a difference in the sense that the goal is the same.
Right.
But I think, well, and the means are the same.
How do you achieve a white ethno-state without some level of genocide and or violent removal of?
Right, yeah. And I guess McVeigh is sort of the jumping off point for this conversation about, alienated youth, because, the problem is that there are so many people like him, and not every single one is going to do something like what he did. But when you have this sort of captive audience or pool of people like that, and the federal government and federal law enforcement going out and inciting or entrapping these people, as they did with the militia that was going to try and kidnap Whitmer, as they do with countless, Muslim young men etc.
There was a story that came out recently where somebody was like arrested for like a terrorist plot or something like that. I forget exactly what the details were,
Mhm.
but um, everyone was confused when the arrest was going down because the people who were like being arrested were like FBI undercover agents, and then the people doing
Yeah.
the arrest were like some other like Department of Homeland Security guys. And
Are you talking about it's Taherzadeh and Ali in DC? The
yes, I think
two.
that's what it was. Yeah.
That case is wild. I have no fucking clue what's going on there.
But
And
it's literally the meme where like Spider-Man is pointing at Spider-Man, and it's
yeah.
like
Well, so
FBI, CIA. Like,
they were not actually on the payroll. Are they had an LLC set up for a private security, private contracting business. They claim to have connections to ISI, which is Pakistani state intelligence.
mhm.
It's a really weird story because I've read some of the criminal complaints and the indictments, and there's never, you know, there's a conspiracy between these two men, but there's never any like this is what they were trying to do. I mean,
Right.
again, it's kind of this like grandiosity, delusions of grandeur type thing, um, that a lot of these types of people suffer from, where they are their egos are so fundamentally wounded that they construct these monumental fantasies.
Motherfuckers that like watched Homeland, that show, and
Right.
then
Yeah.
like took it to be reality in some way, and then made that their reality, and now here we are.
Right. Yeah, it's a really weird one. I'm going to be interested to see what happens. Uh the state is being very aggressive. The judge, at least in the pretrial stuff, is sort of, the judge seems confused from what I've read.
Well,
Because
yeah, because it's state entities like behind all of this, really. So it's like,
yeah, a bunch of the charging documents have been amended. Like there was one of the affiants later amended a statement regarding what he knew or when he knew it. It's just really fucking weird. It to me sounds like there's something deeper going on. It's not as simple as two guys LARPing as federal agents. There's just, because they were giving thousands of dollars um, in either cash, weapons, or housing to federal law enforcement officers. I mean,
right.
there's something, I don't know. Anyways,
Yeah,
um,
that's besides the point. And I'm sorry that I
it's something interesting to
yeah.
to keep track
But
of.
I think this kind of plays back into how somebody like McVeigh happens, right? You know, like
Yeah,
you have somebody who ostensibly is kind of like indoctrinated through the military, which is a federal program, um, and
yeah,
you know, he formulates all these, you know, a lot of guys that I knew when I was in the Marines. You know, they had very anti-government stances, even though they were like trained and fed by the government.
right,
Um, and you know, we have, and I'm not saying being anti-government is like bad necessarily, but that there's a troubling way that anti-government rhetoric happens with a lot of veterans, I think, which is where,
yeah,
you know, yes, I love the state violence, but I don't like it when the state like I don't know, feeds struggling single mothers or something like that.
right,
Um, and that's where their point of contention is, and then they utilize that like indoctrinated state violence in the capacity of fighting the thing that they don't like about the state, which is, you know,
yeah,
that it
And
does
that's
good things every now and then, very rarely, if we're being honest about it.
yeah, and that's kind of another sticking point, and something that a case like McVeigh brings into stark relief is the fact that, obviously there's left and right wing anti-state ideologies, but the right is far more equipped and motivated to actually enact these policies so far as the United States goes. I mean, the because federal law enforcement has publicly stated the risk of right-wing
Yeah.
militias, which again, you guys are fucking inciting them. Like they are
Right. Yeah.
through a number of means. But there's no credible
I,
left-wing threat to the actual.
I always think back to situations like Waco, in this kind of context where um were the Branch Davidians maybe not cool to women and children? Yes, of course. Duh. It's a
Right.
religious cult. But did we fix anything by killing all the women and children? No.
Right.
And
Well,
so
we freed
yeah.
them from the cult.
What's up?
They're not in the. They're not. We freed them from the cult. They're not in the cult anymore.
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, they're not oppressed.
Were fucking gassed to death and burned by the FBI. Yeah, no, it's sickening. And I mean, obviously, Waco and Ruby Ridge are huge flashpoints for these groups.
Well,
And
that's what kind of like inspires this kind of person is the very real
right,
actual understanding that this sort of thing can happen to you as just like, yeah,
right,
maybe you have a couple of problematic beliefs. Um, maybe your worldview isn't like coherent or good or anything like that, but like, how many people are you actually hurting versus the state comes in and now murders everyone? Like,
yeah. It these sort of separatist groups, whether it's on the level of a cult compound or a family, it's important to note, and it actually is in keeping with the original purpose of these Sunday episodes, that these groups are inextricable. Their ideologies are inextricable from American fundamentalists, evangelicalism, Elohim City, which was the neo-Nazi compound that McVeigh was associated with. I think it was Elohim City. It might have been a different compound. Was a breakaway from a Baptist congregation, a fundamentalist Baptist congregation. And I've talked about it on here before, but I have a long-standing fascination with evangelicalism. For the reason that it poses it's such a huge voting block. It has institutional connections that are more straight laced, whether it's the Grams or the prayer breakfast or
well, that's what's so interesting when you get somebody like McVeigh who's like got this
it was
idea that there's like a Zionist conspiracy in the government, right? Like, there
right.
is actually a Zionist conspiracy in the government, but it's not the way that they're interpreting it. This
Well,
Zionist conspiracy is this weird, like, over hyper religious Zionism.
and the solution to that problem isn't to go out and kill all the Jews.
Right.
That is
Because
their
most of the Zionists are guys like Joe Biden. Biden is a Zionist. He's
right,
like a
or even
loudly proclaimed Zionist that says things like, if Israel didn't exist, we would have to create a new Israel or something like that.
yeah.
He's
I mean,
literally said that. Like these are Zionists, and Zionism is weird because Zionism is actually incredibly anti-Semitic, which I think I've talked about once or twice. because Zionism is a Christian belief, and this Christian belief is kind of hinged on
Well, there's a, I
all the
mean,
Jews being obliterated at some point. And so when you're a
that,
Zionist, you want the Jews to be obliterated because that's how you bring about the times of revelation.
that's it. I mean, that's the evangelical Zionism. I mean, Zionism itself as an ideology is endemic to Ashkenazi Jews.
Yeah, no,
And,
for sure.
but yeah, so there's that tension as well, where the through line between the through line between these militia groups who hate Jews and the Zog is evangelical Christianity, which evangelical Christianity just kind of forms the subconscious or unconscious of these people. And I don't mean to say that all evangelicals are white supremacists, but I do think American evangelicalism historically and ideologically is a white supremacist
It, it it's
ideology.
a it's a situation where you're propping something up, right? And so like you might not individually believe as somebody who is evangelical that, other races are lesser to you or whatever, but the system that you're propping up has historically and, in the modern age been white supremacist. So
Yeah. Um,
and this is how a lot of systemic structures sort of work, when they have this kind of like racial bias or anything like that. Is you
yeah.
yourself might not be racist, but if you like support the cops, um hate to
Yeah.
break it to you, but the cops are a racist structure.
Yeah. And in that respect, evangelicalism, I think, is pretty similar to, or it makes sense rather that Mormonism was an American phenomenon, and that it spun off from American Protestantism, because the racial vision of Mormonism is what is inherently and explicitly white supremacist, and I think it simply kind of codifies the unstated racial vision of American Protestantism, and the city on the hill, that kind of, I mean, Protestants, well, not Protestants specifically, I mean, because the Catholic Church did horrendous shit too, but
Yeah.
what it fundamentally gets back to is the simple fact that the American experiment, the colonization of the Americas, was and remains a white supremacist endeavor. And it's funny that that proposition has now become this kind of uh, landmine, kind of controversial thing to say, because of lunatics like Nicole Hannah-Jones with the 1619 Project, falsifying history, literally rewriting history, and then there's the right-wing backlash to it. It should be simple enough to just say, yes, it is a white supremacist, racist undertaking, and because that in itself is a strong claim, but it's a defensible, supportable claim.
Well, yeah, and
Just getting more specific than that, and trying to make things overly granular, it is where the methodological problems come in with that. Anyways, I don't want to go off on fucking Nicole Hannah-Jones because she's not worth the breath. But
no, but really quickly, I would like to say, if you're curious about the 1619 project and why, like, yeah, it's going the right direction, but it's like falsifying a bunch of shit. Listen to people like Adolf Reed, and their critique of the 1619 project.
yeah,
Read
Adolf
I think Black Reconstruction in America by W.E.B. Du Bois was like one of the best books I've ever fucking read. Read that, and
You
like
don't read it there, you listen to it on tape.
yeah, I listened to it on audiobook. But you know, look into things like that, and you don't need something like the 1619 Project, which and the shitty thing that something like this is doing is, yes, it's correctly saying America is a racist country, and then is making shit up. And now you've given an argument to the weirdo white supremacists. You can be like, well, this historical fact or this historical claim isn't true. And you're undermining your own like set of beliefs by making shit up at that point. And you're giving the right this ability to say, no, you're wrong. And now we've got ourselves mired in this like fucking quagmire of dumb bullshit where, you know, the right actually has a point in saying that this isn't true, and they're using that against this project, which is saying, you know, America is racist, which is true, but it's using falsified, you know, documentation of it. The real actual history of America will prove itself to be racist. Right. You don't need to make shit up.
No, yeah. And that, I mean, that's kind of the problem with, I have a personal policy of, you know, if I'm going to read a history book, it's going to be written by a historian, not a journalist, because journalists don't know how to do history. History is a social science. It's more akin to sociology than it is to literary studies or philosophy. And I think to kind of reconnect it back to this theme of disenfranchisement, part of the problem with projects like that is that it inculcates guilt in the hegemonic members of the hegemonic group. And, you know, part of the problem is that there's a fundamental difference between guilt and responsibility. Well, yeah, I think there's a difference between guilt and responsibility, where I think it's reasonable to feel guilty or feel culpable, but that's the backstop. It's not responsibility. To ascribe responsibility for historical errors to contemporary individuals is not productive. It's misguided, and also, I mean, frankly, you know,
that's why
it's poking the bear too, because if you think about it, the argument is basically we live in a white supremacist society. Let's make whites feel bad about themselves. Well, let's look at numbers and let's look at gun ownership. Who outnumbers who, and who has the fucking guns? You know, you're gonna, and that is fundamentally the issue. Like I said earlier, you know, the right wing is far more capable of actually perpetrating acts of violence, political violence, terrorism, than the left, and it's counterproductive and inflammatory to propagate, you know, cultural artifacts that incite that sense of woundedness among a hegemonic group who is not wounded, cannot be wounded. They're structurally insulated, economically insulated, culturally insulated, numerically insulated from actually being wounded on a group level. It's fine if you want to bitch and moan about individual instances where, you know, you're aggrieved on account of whatever it is, affirmative action or whatever. But, you know, the notion that whiteness can be threatened or dethroned as the underlying structure is just it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous, but it is emotionally salient to these people, and that's the issue, is that
And
they feel so strongly.
a point that I'd like to bring up, and going back into Black Reconstruction, why I think it's such an important book is this is how the South really like actually became racist. Is yes, there was a structure of racism with slavery, and the power structure was that whites were dominant over the black people that they had shipped over here to enslave. But the like real long term win of racism is that it pitted the extremely impoverished black folks who are now freedmen against the extremely impoverished white Southerners. And instead of being able to find some kind of identity with each other, what it did is it you know, and there were very powerful political players involved with this, but you know, there was this sense that, oh, now that the black slave is free, he's your competitor, and you had to fight your competitor now. And this is exactly the same sort of thing that you're kind of talking about, where, you know, guilt tripping some poor white person who's never actually had anything good in their lives, and you know, like, just explicitly calling them a racist outright without them even knowing like why they're being called a racist, or like uh having that understanding of the history or whatever. You're not consolidating any kind of power against the elite or
Mhm.
anything like that. You're making enemies with people who should actually be your allies.
Yeah, and I mean, it's reasserting, reinscribing that power structure itself.
Yeah,
Just the structure of racial tension. And I think too, part of the problem, again, to state ad nauseum at this point, that there's no left wing threat to power in this country. We are unique in terms of one second. We are unique, in terms of colonial projects that we settled this. We being whites settled this country through ethnic cleansing and genocide, and then maintained that possession through enslavement. Whereas, um, European colonial powers were and are, racially homogenous. And so that necessary splitting of the underclass, or rather that splitting of the underclass, was never necessary. The sort of cultural warfare of racism, and that's why, I mean, that's part of the reason why that there was more fertile ground ideologically for concerted left politics, whether socialist or anarchist or whatever, in mainland continental Europe. And I mean, I think, you know, I just, McVeigh is such an exemplary figure of what happens when someone is inculcated, where there is that guilt inculcated in that person, where they're placed in and participate in a racist project like American foreign policy, and furthermore hone their skills with weapons, and learning how to pursue warfare and conduct warfare. It is difficult to see a trajectory in that person's life that does not, whether it's McVeigh or someone else, because there's plenty of other people like him who don't do what he did, but it's difficult to see a trajectory that does not wind up at that person becoming either becoming a racist or becoming a more virulent racist, a more committed racist. And there's plenty of indoctrination goals of that the government pursues through the armed forces and its soldiers. But I don't know, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that it's trying to maintain or incite racial division in the domestic sphere necessarily.
I would agree with that. It doesn't mean to be racist in a domestic sense, but something that I kind of observed when I was enlisted and around groups of people who were engaging in active warfare. I'm fortunate enough that I never had to shoot anybody, and what I noticed in people who did end up having to shoot someone is you do one of two things. You either feel this immense guilt that you can never escape from, or you double down on whatever enforced that ability to kill someone. And when it ends up happening, if you're the person that shot someone, like I said, you either feel horrified by what you did and you like completely deconstruct everything, and you end up as like someone who abhors violence, or you double down on that belief and you go, well, I was justified in shooting this person, and so now I have to like justify all of the things that led to me shooting this person. And this goes into like, well, Middle Eastern people are violent, and I was just putting a dog down, sort of stuff. And when you do that, and you learn to basically view another human being as less than you inherently in some way, which is the necessary thing that you have to do in order to like not feel this immense guilt. Yeah, it creates this inherent like predisposition to being violent towards other human beings.
Yeah, and then one thing, I guess, in a situation like that, it seems to me that the racism is almost ancillary or prosthetic to
Absolutely, yeah.
That dehumanization, because that, in the sense that fully dehumanizing someone is really difficult. You need that's the mechanism, but the racism or homophobia, anti-Semitism, whatever, is the sort of the if the dehumanization is the vehicle, the bigotry is like the fuel that you're putting in it to get it. And I think, and that's kind of what is interesting too about terrorism that strikes at a members in group, whether it's suicide bombers in the Middle East or someone like McVeigh. It speaks to that, to the fervor and zealotry of the anti-establishment viewpoint, and it's a feeling. It's not a, it's I think it does a discredit to, and it prevents a full understanding of it, to simply say, well, this person's an ideologue. There is an emotional landscape that these people are enmeshed in that we are not, that allows them to do something like this. McVeigh spent the time between his discharge and the bombing, going around the country, attending gun shows, and building relationships with white supremacists of all stripes. In the same way, you know, the emotional landscape of a suicide bomber or someone who bombs a mosque is that they are so, and I guess what I would say is like the fundamental thing here is emasculation. These people feel emasculated. Again, because it's men who do this stuff. It is a fundamentally male problem, and American foreign policy has cut autonomy off at the knees all across the world wherever we've gone in and pursued nation building or whatever the fuck. And in the same way, there's the demographic changes in this country, by which I don't mean particularly ethnic or racial, what they are active here. It's more in I think the fundamental problem is changes in family structure and community. And I think you and I have talked about this a little bit, it's difficult to, I think it's difficult to state this in a way that doesn't sound anti women's lib, but the degree to which women participate in the labor force has had a correlation with the degree to which men, a positive correlation to the degree to which men, I think, feel incited to do shit like this. And obviously, as we said earlier, with, the fact that there is a Zionist lobby that's powerful in this country, the solution isn't to kill the Jews. Similarly, the solution to this problem isn't to bar women from working, but there is a cultural lag between equitable participation in the labor force and the sort of emotional ease or peace with that among certain parts of the male populace. And again, it's up to that person to get good with it.
Well, I think what we're seeing is in some ways a little bit analogous to what I was describing with the newly freed slaves and the poor whites, right? Like, now women have entered the workforce, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, except that we are all compelled to be in the workforce. Survival depends on being in the workforce, and now women being capable laborers is a threat to the traditional male breadwinner. Not in reality, but only because we live in this construct of having to work in order to earn the living that you provide to a family. And so because it's all hinged on this premise of if you don't work, your family's going to die. Now women are a threat to the male breadwinner because of that, right? Like, and we could all work together, and I know many women who are amazing at their jobs and that sort of thing. But it's just a simple fact that we are compelled to compete in this way, and so now that competition has changed, and this creates a resentment between these groups.
Right. And I think, it reminds me of, there's a line in, I think, it would be an Anti-Oedipus, not 1,000 Plateaus, where D&G say that something to the effect that, capitalism is endlessly capable of adding axioms, by which they mean essentially what their understanding of capitalism is, that it does not have an inherent cultural substrate, or not substrate exactly, but it does not have a necessary cultural content, in the sense that
it just does whatever is profitable.
Right. Yeah. The point of capital is capital accumulation. So if, you know, if ending slavery, or liberalizing the labor market is a way to do that, that's what they mean by adding axioms, or even something not necessarily cultural, but more kind of mechanical or economic, like greenwashing, and I mean, it just the degree, something like Tesla, which is a nominally, the purpose is supposedly to save the world somehow, but you're saving the world by, mining, taking conflict minerals and inciting ethnic conflict in areas where these minerals are found. I saw, just an aside, I think I just saw recently that Mexico was nationalizing its lithium reserves, which is.
And we're about to see Joe Biden go to war with Mexico, I think.
Yeah, well, they got oil too, so why not?
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, there's like this lag is something that's the lag is the issue, where there is this mechanical addition of a new operation, that it takes time for individuals to catch up to, emotionally, cognitively, politically.
Well, and the reason that it takes them time to catch up to that is because it threatens their immediate survival, right? Like I was saying with the the freedmen as a new source of labor.
Yeah.
Whites in the South were resistant to this because it was threatening their ability to make money, and just like, all right, so Mexico was going to nationalize its lithium industry. This threatens a lot of jobs in America, and or not America, the U.S., because Mexico is in the Americas.
Wow. You just checked your privilege so
Yeah.
hard there, bro.
But this threatens jobs in the U.S., and it's not recognized. The problem is that you have to have a job in order to survive.
Yeah.
It's that your job is threatened because that's your survival.
Yeah. And it's funny. I'm just Mr. Theory today. It reminds me of Marcuse's One Dimensional Man, which is a really fucking fascinating book, uh, for a variety of reasons. Like, the content itself is very interesting, and it's such a product of its time, and kind of presaged things to come in its imminent wake. But Marcuse is a proponent of this notion that, there are, it's a classical, in the sense of Greek, hierarchical kind of vision of society, where there's the proles, and then there's the philosopher kings. And I think the modern play out of that is the so-called professional managerial class, of people like, said we weren't going to talk about it, people like Nicole Hannah-Jones, or anyone who fucking writes for the New York Times, or the New Yorker, or NPR, or works in Hollywood, or works in DC, or whatever. And it, regardless of that individual's background, they could be someone who grew up in, downstate Illinois, or, Missouri or Mississippi or Arkansas, or any number of the flyover states. But, there's a rewiring that happens when you move into those sort of ideological spaces. And there's no way for those people to remain true to or bear witness to what we're talking about, which is that the necessity of class solidarity, because the spaces that those people are working in it's a cottage industry of fomenting division. That is their purpose, is to divide, to incite, and it's on one level, it would be a lot of cognitive dissonance to do that and then go home and be like, man, I really, rah, 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 fucking singing the Internationale as they, shower or whatever the fuck. There's that. And then there's also just those people get flushed out. People who do remain true or who are ideologues they get drummed out in the way that the military drums people out in the early stages of enlistment in boot camp. And it's also worth mentioning that the pool that those people are drawn from is, again, while it's certainly true that a working class person could break into it, it's drawn from the middle class, and it's drawn from a group of people who are already predisposed to, by virtue of their lived experience, to not having insight into the grievances of either racial minorities or the poor, whether white or black or whatever. And what winds up happening is this sort of, paternalistic racism. It's a mix of, the noble savage, of, picking of these white PMC types, picking a few good ones to prop up, or it is, and this is oftentimes, I think this is really what's being fomented right now, is the bigotry of low expectations, meaning that it's sort of saying yes to the most racist understandings of minorities and saying, well, they've risen to their station, that's where they top out. And
you see this in a lot of popular rhetoric, where you get somebody who's almost certainly a racist, right? And they're saying things like, why are black people complaining? Look at famous NBA star who has millions of dollars. Everybody could do that, right? We've given them this opportunity. Why are they complaining about being poor?
Right, or the types that say, well, we had a black president.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Like we've given them this capability, so why are they complaining? And like it's looking at the exception and not the rule.
Yeah, and I think too that that's one side of that coin, because then at the same time there's people like I don't know, who do I want to pick on? There's people like, Jen Psaki, who undoubtedly I don't think would espouse that kind of rhetoric of, well, why are they so complaining? We had Barack Obama, who she worked for. But she's so on the one side there is that exemplary racism. There's there's the Steph Currys, the Oprahs, the Obamas of the world. But then the other side is the NIMBY side, who are nominally not racist, but also they wouldn't want to live next to a Black family, or they wouldn't want their child to date a minority, because their vision of the world and their understanding of themselves, it's a genteel racism. It's not, they're not ever, their linens don't have holes in them. They're not going to go out burning crosses, but it's a liberal racial separatism.
Yeah.
It's and I think those people, in the sense that those people are actually, insofar as the right wing has a more military or militant capacity to work against the state, the sort of liberal cultural forces are more institutionally capable of maintaining it. And it's kind of like, I think your mentioning of Black Reconstruction is really apropos there too, because it's a matter of the PMC and these sort of cultural laborers or workers who are producing the kind of they're the ones who are setting the Overton window, and they're the ones who don't interact with poor whites. They certainly don't interact with minorities, unless they're sort of these exemplary types, and even then it's at arm's length. So yeah, I think, I don't know, I guess to me it seems like, obviously, acts of political violence have increased drastically over the past 25 years even, and I think the right wing is going to they're going to get more and more ornery and hostile as things go on. Because they've got the guns, they've got the know-how. There is real demographic change happening. It's not by any means what is it, the Great Replacement or whatever,
right?
Like,
yeah,
again,
white genocide, Great Replacement, etc.
Not happening, won't ever happen, but it's the nature of things to change. And
well, I think the other thing to mention is even if a Great Replacement, quote unquote, does happen, that's essentialist belief that doesn't matter, right? Like,
yeah,
oh no, we're all gonna be tan.
right.
Who cares?
Right. Yeah, no, I think and that's, but again, that speaks to the sort of emotional importance of the fact to me that someone's whiteness could give them a sense of meaning is just so, I understand it, but at the same time, and I understand it in the like anthropological, sociological sense. I don't
you don't personally believe it.
It's like what, like it's silly, and it. But I don't. It's oftentimes difficult for me to have sympathy or for those people, because it's so ludicrous. Even though it's unfortunate that becomes the kind of turning point for those people around which their understanding of the world revolves. But yeah, I don't see things getting better. I think that's
no,
fair.
I try to avoid being a pessimist, but at the same time, I think what I see is a trajectory that we're on, and not a whole lot of people are like recognizing this trajectory and because not a whole lot of people are recognizing this trajectory. We're just like fucked. I mean,
Yeah.
Joe Biden is our president right now, and if that doesn't make you feel bad inside, uh, you're,
Yeah.
you're missing a lot of cues.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, uh, the statistics about his the way people feel about him is telling. And I think there's going to be a red wave at midterms.
Oh,
I
without a doubt.
I don't know. I think it remains to be seen, or at least I don't yet have an indication in my mind of what letter the next president will have next to their name. I think it could go either way. I don't know. I mean, the problem is, I mean, fucking, and I hate talking about mainstream politics, but like the Republicans are just so fucking nuts now, man. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Madison
Well,
Cawthorn, and
that's why I don't spend very much
it's,
time, on this
yeah,
and the main podcast. I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about Republicans, because if you think that Republicans are
right.
okay, or um not obviously fucking deranged right
Stupid.
now, like
Yeah,
you're so far gone that I can't help you. But
yeah, no,
the thing that I'd like to talk about is the kind of insidious aspects of the Democratic Party, because
right.
the Democrats have this face that they put on. um
The party for the people.
yeah, where they have this more, not necessarily popularist, but like more I don't know, gentle, I guess, way of approaching politics, where they'll say that they want to do good things, but like, gee, we just can't make it happen, sort of stuff. And
Putin's fault.
that's what, Biden kind of ran on, was
Yeah.
I'm gonna do good things, and then he gets into office and he doesn't do any good things, and this makes people um I think predisposed to the idea of like, well, fuck it, let's just get some asshole in there that'll fuck things up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of an accelerationist
Yeah,
position, like that people wind up being kind of painted into the corner.
it's frustration with the system that dominates their lives, and people are either given the choice of, oh, maybe this person isn't lying this time and they'll do something good, or they'll
Yeah.
try to do something good, or destroy the whole fucking thing, let's burn it all down.
And it's worth mentioning too, this is purely anecdotal, but I don't think it's uh, any big secret. But I mean, the absolute disdain that the Democratic um, power core has for Black voters is just disgusting, and they take them for granted, and it's a carrot and a stick. I mean, I knew an attorney in the place where I live, which I'm not going to say, but it's a very, very blue city that historically is, yeah, it's just corrupt Democrats. But this attorney who I knew was African American and was trying to arrange a fundraiser. He was the head of some sort of Black men's society or organization or something, and was trying to arrange a fundraiser for a white candidate. I think for the state legislature, and basically kept getting dicked around by this candidate's who was a white man, getting dicked around by this candidate's staff, and they wouldn't commit. And finally this attorney who I knew basically said, well, like, I'm trying to help out and I'm getting frustrated. And this this candidate's staff, I think, pretty much explicitly said to him, well, what are you going to do? Vote Republican? And that is exactly what he did. He switched.
We don't even have to, go to that granular level of local politics. You had Joe Biden himself talking to Charlemagne the God on the Breakfast Club, saying, "If you don't vote for me, you're not black." Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, which is something.
Which just speaks to how arrogant the Democrats are, where the position is either vote for a Republican who is most assuredly trying to bring back slavery, or
right.
vote for us. We're not going to do anything for you, but we're not going to try to bring back slavery necessarily. Lots of arguments to be made about how slavery still exists today.
There's a really great scholar, I think at Georgetown. I believe his name is Olafumi Taiwo, and he's a scholar of like Black politics and culture. And trying to remember, I listened to him on a podcast several years ago, and
You were
was
struck by how well spoken he was. I'm just kidding.
wow. No, but it was in the lead up to the 2020 election, and he was talking about precisely this issue that and he was talking too about. I think he was a Bernie guy, and he was talking about Bernie's the controversy that surrounded Bernie's statement that open borders was a Koch brothers wet dream or whatever. He didn't say wet dream, obviously, but whatever it was that he said, which is accurate because open borders depress labor costs, and again, pit two sectors of labor against each other.
Right, because you have a workforce that is indentured, which is what open borders do.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way, but I think I've got problems with Bernie's world politics, but I think he's correct in saying that open borders are a Koch brothers wet dream, because how things exist now, open borders allow indentured servants to come across the border and then essentially be enslaved for slave wages. And this creates the same problem that we had after slaves were freed, which is that now they're competitors in the workforce for people who would legally be entitled to a minimum wage.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I mean that minimum wage is already starvation wages anyway. So yeah, it's there's also maybe a lesson to be learned in something like the Grapes of Wrath here.
Steinbeck was an op.
Yeah.
Was CIA, yeah. Actually, like unironically, yeah, he was CIA.
Damn, I didn't know that. I like some of his books. Does that make me an op?
I love Steinbeck.
Yeah.
But he was. I don't think he was an intelligence officer per se, but he was someone who worked at the behest of the CIA.
My God.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a matter of keeping your head up for the future. Because it's like, I don't know. I don't really believe that. I mean, I think,
No, I'm not saying I agree with like the fundamental like message of the Grapes of Wrath. It's just the entire like labor market struggle that happens in the Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
And how somebody's always going to be willing to work for less because they have absolutely nothing.
Because the choice, it's an ultimatum.
Yeah.
starvation and death, or
die or work for 10 cents a day.
right. And that's the free market, baby. That's why this
Yep.
country is the greatest country on earth. God bless America.
Yeah,
You know,
I think that's maybe where we should cut this off. Just God bless America. It's doing great. No problems.
no problems.
No historical issues that are going to deeply impact our current life.
Yeah, there's no widening rift in our society that is going to
Yeah.
struggle. I mean, there's no
We're
threat.
not going to see intensifying acts of terrorism that then justify state power,
Right.
but don't ever question how the state is conducting itself.
Yeah. The United States is a lot like Ukraine in the sense that there are no Nazis here.
Yeah. Very
There's
cool.
no right wing military threat in this
Yeah.
country.
Well, good. Glad we got that sorted out. Thanks as always for joining.
Yep.
Do I do the sign off? No, I don't do the sign off on this shit. I don't love you. Don't take your medicine. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Um, have a wonderful, blessed day, everybody.
Yeah. It's the day of the Lord, Sunday.